There is a moment I keep returning to. A Saturday afternoon last autumn, my daughter sitting at the kitchen table with nothing in front of her. No screen, no craft supplies, no planned activity. Just the afternoon light coming through the window and her own small face, slightly restless, slightly at a loss. She looked up at me and said, very seriously, "I'm bored." And I felt it, that immediate pull, that almost physical urge to offer something, a puzzle, a walk to the park, a story I could read to her, to smooth the moment before it became uncomfortable for either of us. I folded the dish towel in my hands, looked at her, and said nothing. Then I turned back to the sink. What happened in the next 40 minutes changed how I think about childhood and about what my role in it actually is. There is a phrase from Italian family culture, 2 words, that most parents in the English-speaking world have only ever encountered in travel writing or on the back of a design magazine. And developmental psychologists have been quietly studying its effects on children for decades. I want to be specific, what the practice involves, what it doesn't involve, and what the research actually found when families followed it consistently. The findings surprised me. They might surprise you too. The phrase is dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. You may have heard it before as a kind of Italian cultural temperament, the ease with sitting at a cafe table for 2 hours without looking at a phone, the willingness to let an afternoon simply exist without filling it. But in Italian family life, dolce far niente carries a more specific meaning when it comes to children. It refers to the deliberate, protected window in a child's day where nothing is organized, no entertainment is offered, no screen is present, and no adult steps in to direct what comes next. It is not rest exactly, and it is not laziness. It is the particular quality of stillness that emerges when a child is simply left to exist without input, and it turns out that specific quality of stillness is doing something. When I started looking into the developmental psychology behind this, I expected warm cultural anecdote, the kind of wisdom that sounds right but doesn't survive scrutiny. What I found instead was a body of careful, specific research I hadn't seen discussed outside of academic writing, and it reframed something I had been doing instinctively, and incorrectly, for years. Researchers at the University of East Anglia followed children from ages 4 to 6 and examined what happened when unstructured, screen-free time was regularly protected in a child's daily schedule. Not large amounts of time, 20 minutes, once a day, consistently. The results, when published, were measurable and specific. Children in the study showed meaningful gains in creative problem-solving, self-directed play, and emotional regulation compared to age-matched peers whose free time was typically filled with organized activities or passive screen time. By age 6, these children were significantly more likely to generate novel solutions to open-ended problems and meaningfully better at returning to calm after frustration or upset. These are not soft outcomes. Developmental psychologists call these foundational capacities, the kind that predict academic and social success years into childhood. And the researchers pointed to a specific mechanism, an explanation for why the simple, deliberate absence of directed activity produces these gains. That explanation is worth understanding, because once you see it, a bored child looks entirely different. When a child's brain is not being directed, not receiving input from a screen, not following an adult's instructions, not navigating the rules of a structured game, it activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is sometimes called the imagination network, and the name reflects what it actually does. This network is deeply involved in creative thinking, internal narrative, perspective-taking, and the processing of emotional experience. It is the state the brain enters when a child begins, with no external prompt, to wonder what would happen if, to invent characters and worlds, to revisit something that confused them and turn it over slowly until it begins to make sense, to pose their own questions and reach toward their own answers. The default mode network is not passive. It is one of the most metabolically active states the brain can enter. And here is what surprised me most when I first encountered this research. This network cannot fully activate when a child is being entertained, not even by calm, warm, age-appropriate content. Any passive consumption, even thoughtful, gentle screen time, keeps the brain in a receiving state. The creative, self-directed, generative state requires something quite specific: the absence of input and the mild but real discomfort we call boredom. Dolce far niente, in Italian family culture, is the deliberate creation of those conditions. Not by design exactly, in Italy it is simply the texture of daily life. But the effect, whether consciously intended or not, is the same. Here is where this becomes genuinely difficult for most modern parents, because the obstacle is not information, it is instinct. We have been shaped, quietly and persistently, through everything from parenting books to school newsletters to the architecture of children's apps, to measure good parenting by stimulation, by enrichment, by how fully a child's hours are accounted for. A busy child feels like a developing child. A bored child feels like evidence of something missed. This equation lives so deep in modern parenting culture that many of us don't even notice we have absorbed it. It simply feels like attentiveness, like care. What's most surprising about the research is not the finding itself, it is how directly it contradicts what we spend most of our parenting energy doing. We fill schedules, we buy enrichment kits, we worry during any moment of stillness that we should be offering something better. And in doing so, with the best of intentions, we quietly remove the single condition under which creative capacity actually develops. Something worth naming clearly: the children's entertainment and wellness industries have a meaningful financial interest in keeping parents anxious about unoccupied time. Every educational app, every enrichment subscription, every activity kit, they exist in part because we have been convinced that empty time is a problem requiring a product. The research suggests it may be one of the most valuable things we can simply protect by doing nothing at all. So what does dolce far niente actually look like inside an Italian family? This matters, because in Italy this is not a conscious parenting practice parents decide to implement. It is simply the texture of daily life, woven into the rhythm of Italian afternoons in a way that feels entirely unremarkable to people who grew up with it. After the midday meal, especially on weekends, there is a kind of collective pause in Italian domestic culture. Adults rest and talk. Children are not organized into activities. They drift. They might wander into the garden and stand there for a while, looking at nothing in particular. They might lie on the floor. They might fidget their way through something elaborate and half-invented and quietly abandoned. Nobody steps in to redirect, and nobody worries that they should. There is also something specific about how Italian parents respond when a child announces they are bored. It is not a suggestion. It is not a redirection. It is a calm, unhurried acknowledgement, something close to, "Yes, I imagine you are," followed by a quiet return to whatever the adult was doing. What that response communicates, without a single explicit word of instruction, is worth sitting with. Boredom is not an emergency. The adult is not alarmed. Something will come from inside you if you give it time. Put yourself in the child's position for a moment. You have announced your discomfort to the person whose response you trust most, and that person has heard you, acknowledged your experience without distress, and not moved to resolve it. The child receives, without any teaching, one of the most important early lessons in emotional development: that discomfort does not require rescue, that you can feel at a loss and remain intact, that something will arrive from inside you. What do you think your child does when genuinely left to themselves, with nothing provided? Not with a toy they've been handed, not with a screen, truly unoccupied, with no one directing what comes next? It is a real question, and I am genuinely curious. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone, and the variety of what children invent in this space is one of the most quietly wonderful things I have encountered in researching this. Developmental psychologists describe what happens in that gap, the moment between a child's discomfort and its resolution, as one of the earliest forms of self-regulation. Not because a parent taught a technique, because the child was trusted, and nobody intervened before they could come through on their own. A 2017 study at the University of Central Lancashire made this visible in controlled conditions. Researchers divided children into two groups. The first completed a tedious, repetitive task before a creative assessment, sorting dried beans into cups, one by one. The second went directly into the creative task after an engaging activity. The children who had been bored first generated significantly more creative responses, more ideas, more unexpected connections, more willingness to propose something that might not work, which is what creative thinking actually requires. One detail from that study stayed with me. The bored group didn't just produce more ideas, they produced stranger ones, less conventional, less predictable. The researchers concluded that the tedium had done something specific. It had forced the brain to seek stimulation from within, and the imagination, when activated this way, produces something that external stimulation never quite reaches. External stimulation always supplies both the question and the answer. Internal stimulation, the kind dolce far niente protects, lets the child pose their own questions. The most concrete takeaway from both studies is simple enough to say plainly. Once each day, protect approximately 20 minutes where nothing is planned, no screen is offered, no activity is suggested, and no rescue is provided when the boredom complaint arrives. That is the entire practice. What it looks like varies by family. For some, it is the window after school before dinner, a child simply present in the kitchen while a parent cooks, with no direction given. For others, it is Sunday morning before the day has acquired structure. The conditions that matter are not about the setting, they are about the absence. No screen, no structured activity, and critically, no parental intervention when the announcement comes, because it will come. In the first days, it may come with some force. The most common difficulty families report when they begin this practice is not the child's resistance, but their own. The discomfort of a bored child lands in a parent's body as something that requires action. This is not a fault. It is a deeply human response to someone we love feeling uncomfortable, but the research is consistent. It is precisely in the space between that discomfort and its resolution where creative capacity develops. A phrase Italian parents often use, without framing it as philosophy, devi trovare tu. You need to find something yourself. Not dismissive, certain, the quiet assurance of a culture that has never quite doubted a child's capacity to generate their own experience, given enough room. If you try the 20-minute window this week, I would genuinely love to know what your child does in it. Comment below, whatever comes, what they invent, what they build, what they return to. In my experience, the variety is extraordinary and impossible to predict. What happened in my kitchen that Saturday was not dramatic. My daughter sat for several minutes. She fidgeted. She looked at the ceiling. She sighed, specifically in my direction. And then, quietly, she began constructing an elaborate scenario involving 3 stuffed animals, a tea towel, and what she described very seriously as a rescue mission. She played that game for 40 minutes, entirely alone, with a focus I rarely see when I plan something for her. I did not teach her that. I simply did not interrupt it from arriving. Dolce far niente is, more than anything else, an act of trust. Trust that a child's inner life is rich enough, strange enough, generative enough to fill a quiet afternoon. Trust that the mild restlessness of an unoccupied moment is not a problem to be solved, but a doorway, and that what comes through that doorway cannot be engineered, purchased, or scheduled into being. The research gives us permission to do something that feels, at first, counterintuitive, to fold the dish towel and turn back to the sink, to trust that the 40 minutes of stillness and daydreaming and elaborate imagination that no adult planned is not wasted time. It may be the most important part of the day. If this resonated, there is more waiting here. A video about La Passeggiata, the Italian evening walk, and what researchers have found it does for the parent-child bond over time is right here. And if something in this was useful, please share it with another parent in your life. Sometimes the ideas that help most travel through a quiet, unhurried recommendation.